So it's my pleasure to introduce tonight's poet, Sydney Lea. Besides being a poet, he's also a novelist, an essayist, columnist, and he founded New England Review in 1977 and a man after my own heart since I edited the Worcester Review for so long. He edited it until 1989. He has 12 previous poetry collections. Pursuit of a Wound was one of 3 finalists for the 2001 Pulitzer Prize for Poetry. And his preceding volume, To the Bone, New and Selected Poems, won the 1998 Poets Prize. Lea has received fellowships from the Rockefeller, Fulbright and Guggenheim Foundation and has taught at Dartmouth and Yale and many other institutions in the United States and throughout the world. He currently lives in one of the most gorgeous spots in New England, Newbury, Vermont, and is active in both literacy efforts and in conservation in northern Vermont. Sid's been described as, quote, a man in the woods with his head full of books and a man in books with his head full of woods. So his passion for the natural world informs almost every utterance. So it's just a great thrill to have Sid with us. So Sydney Lea, I'm going to turn the mic over to you.
Thank you, Roger, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you out there in Zoom land for tuning into the reading. I'm delighted to have Roger's good opinion and to be online with you. I have it's an ill-timed 13th collection of poems called Here. It came out in October and was starting to get reviewed around February. And then everything else went south. So I don't really know what's going on now, but that's not my concern. I'm more interested in the work than in its promotion. So at all events, I'm going to read primarily from it. I've got a few new poems. I've been having not a whole lot else to do during the lockdown. And being a retired man, I've done an unusual amount of writing. I think perhaps more writing than I've ever done in my life during the COVID lockdown. And at the risk of blowing my own horn, I wrote a 17-page sequence called Animate Objects, which is a Corona lockdown sequence. And if you don't know, and I say this not on my account, but on account of the journal's excellent, there's an online poetry journal called the American Poetry Journal. And that sequence has just gone up online in their July issue. And if you're at all interested and not dissuaded after hearing me tonight, you can just go there and just click on my name. So I will read a lesser number of newer poems, but mostly, as I say, mostly from this book here. The first one is entitled Spilled Milk and has a little inscription that says, an apology to a daughter almost 40 years late. Spilled milk. The train lumbered out of Toronto Station. Together, we headed for subarctic lakes to visit your brother at camp, your older and only sibling then. I dreamed of northern air as our coach careened past clinkers, barrels, filthy railway sheds, ugly as you were lovely. I ordered a spread of lunchtime stuff with me for some coffee, a glass of milk for you. A dozen miles would pass before you took a drink. You had a habit, almost willful it seemed, of spilling whatever you drank. And must have been afraid, damn it, to reach for your glass while the dining car swayed and quivered. As for me, distracted, I was fixed on the winking waters we'd find upstream from the mess of Milky River at trackside. In time, we escaped those outskirts into open prairie space, and you spilled the glass, of course. I pray at least I said nothing out loud, but I have no doubt you could read my miserable thoughts. And now, if I get to hell, as I sometimes think I will if justice prevails, precisely for things I've thought, My Haitian vision may be of your shame-ridden 6-year-old face, all riven by worry, which it should have been my fatherly duty to soothe, restoring what had been its beauty. In the Second Great War, a lot of people, certainly one is younger than I, are unaware of the fact that the armed forces were segregated until the Truman administration. And my father was company commander for a company of so-called colored troops. He was stationed in Gadsden, Alabama. And he ran into a little trouble down there for what was regarded as Yankee ways. And when the worst of the trouble erupted, my mother grabbed me and took off. She said I was not going to be born in Gadsden, Alabama, so I was born in my native Pennsylvania, but I came within an eighth. She was 8 months pregnant when that happened. This is called The Owl and I. Once the Jim Crack Cross got burned on her lawn, my mother took off back north to have me. My father was stationed in Gadsden, Alabama before the Second Great War, commander of so-called colored troops. And he'd invited a few of his men inside the house, it seems. A radical thing indeed just then in the heart of Jim Crow Dixie. So my mother escaped giving birth down there. Though I don't have any idea why I'd think of this, which near to her death, she spoke of so many years after. Why now, on watching a barred owl glide to a hemlock gone dark at sundown? Everything else is well going dark around me here where I stand. Once at midnight, she thought she had heard a whoop of human anguish and wondered whether some soldier were being lynched outside. My father went for a look, but found nothing. My lifelong relations with my mother were vexed, I now suspect, in part because between us two stood a lot in common. Jews were being crammed into cattle cars then, but for Dad and those troops, the evil in Europe lay several months ahead. Still, real or imagined, that cry of mortal misery stuck with Mother. Though no signs of nearby violence turned up next morning. The company came en masse to mess. Shit on a shingle, as the GIs said, dried beef on toast. So life went on, at least for a while, more or less. It ought to bring comfort that I'm where I am, aging but safe, my kids constantly swelling as sons and daughters produce their sons and daughters. And winter so harsh this year, giving way at last to spring, with snowdrops glinting, the freshets making their evanescent cascades through woods. I recall how my mother loved this season. Why then this lonely sensation? It feels that I'm in some pitch black tunnel and won't get out again, that this, as the saying goes, is it. That all I'll have at the end, of course there can't be anything to it, is the sorrowful 8-note anthem of that single owl, the sound just now having reached my vexed old head, though I'd be foolish to think that song was addressed to anyone human. I'm trying to figure out what my wife is doing. She's on the floor, which is very unusual for her. Oh, maybe this drawer. She's very good at improving me. Okay, so I've done it. All right. This next poem is called I Keep Going at 20 Below. It's got birds in it again. I have a lot of poems with birds in them in this book. I keep going at 20 below. It's too cold for me to stay out long at my age. So I trek the half-mile road below our shed, its earth deep hidden beneath the white. Far east, Black Mountain shows up, starkly edged on a sky full of crystals. My boots on frigid ground are cheeping loudly enough that with these bad ears, I can't right off discern another sound. Pine siskins by the score. They yammer from every evergreen in sight. I used to plow on snowshoes through powder for hours and hours. It shames me to say that the notion scares me now. Still, it's hard to keep with wistfulness when air keeps glittering so, and creatures no bigger than my thumbs keep at their sustenance, dauntless. Each bird tears at bough tips, feeding and tweeting. I focus on one that worries the sparkling tip of a spruce cone, eats, then darts to another. Beyond the bird, beyond the conifers in which it sat, beyond the outlying mountain, well, what passes even beyond bright air? And who's to sense it? Not I. It's birdsong that prompts such opening phrases. Beyond all this, let time complete my sentence. When I turned 60, which was longer ago than I like to acknowledge, but it's quite a while, it occurred to me that I was, running to stay in shape, and using that verb rather loosely, even when my knees were good, was not going to work out. My bones wouldn't take it anymore. So I, in a fit of what my youngest daughter, who's my wittiest and severest critic, referred to as geezer madness, I took up the sport of competitive flatwater kayaking, which is great because it has no impact and because I can get launched on the Connecticut River within about 5 minutes from my house. And this, that is the setting for this poem called Poetic License. I dedicate it to my dear friend Fleda Brown, who's a former Vermont Poet Laureate and just an absolutely wonderful poet. If you don't know her work, I urge it on you strongly. Poetic License. She appeared to be standing hock deep in a cove, her eyes on each flash of my blade. I paddled in for the thrill of watching a wild thing's flight. When the doe didn't run, I concluded she couldn't. I circled to view the ruined hindquarters, the entrails that fluttered like pennants in slow-moving water. She wasn't standing at all, but knelt in the dusk of ash and cottonwood shade. I returned to the launch and started over, intent on a personal best, to the bridge upstream and back in the light, long kayak I use whenever I race. At my age, of course, my real competition is time itself. I kept my eyes from the cove as I passed again, yet, resist as I might, I fell off course, not because of the fate of the doe, which I knew to be common, or at least scarcely tragic, except as the sentimental apply the term. Not that I didn't hope the coyote would come back to end the deer's struggle, or that she'd weaken and drown before I came back myself from upriver. No, my true distraction lay in thinking a poem might be struggling its way to the front against my will. I'm strong if I say so, at least for my age, and if I hadn't drifted ever so briefly to see her still kneeling, I'd surely have made my best time yet. Not strong enough to stay honest, however, I sensed old art prevailing. Pardon the precious diction. How fitting, I thought, if sunlight could turn now to rain. It didn't, but that hardly mattered. I had license to choose from a store of old lies. Full access, that is, to a whole range of skies. I'll turn to a few newer ones. This one called Spring Poem in the Season of Corona. Last night our pond reclaimed a foot from its ice. New water winks blue-green and blackbirds shriek from wire and weed. It's good to be out. Two boys hiked by me at social distance. Each breeze-tossed leaf looks as crisp and twitchy as a chipmunk's ear. The mud road grasps at boot soles as I walk the other way. On a tree, I detect the scar of an errant winter driver. I catch the talk of school kids out of school, their classmates, popular or not, all girls or otherwise, the names of games that they can't play. The runt defers to his companion, who, unprompted, screams abuse at all restrictions. As they pass from hearing, I note an earthworm turning proper pink. Though soon the ambient landscape will be wearing proper raiment, nodding grass and dank, deep moss, spare overlay of meadow flowers. I've lived enough to expect odd snow squalls, slaps to anger my nasty winds. I predict more hours in which we're sealed in rooms, foursquare and flat, where we'll dream of the past or pray for the future when a softer time will come and go, and mist will rise from pond and outlet brook to wend its way to a busy playground. Sun once kissed my own playful body. Sweet bijou of sweat rose into uninfected morning's odor. Who knew that what my parents labeled older would mean this strange state? Not then, but then not yet. Another poem that recalls childhood. It's called Small, Paratroopers, 1950. I remember my dad would talk occasionally, but very rarely about the war. And if he did, it was always a funny story because he told me that at Omaha Beach, he lost 70% of his men. So it was a traumatic memory for him. But he would talk about the war and I'd say, God, is he still thinking about that? That's such a long, long time ago. When you're 8 years old, then 8 years is a long, long time ago. So there's a little overlay of that in this poem called Small Paratroopers, 1950. Barn swallows, common as dirt then, would swoop from the rafters defending their broods. They strafed us. We thought it was funny. Cobwebs festooned the dimly lit L, where a pair of obsolete tractors nodded like grandparents on Thanksgiving night. One friend, Ronnie, a scrawny redhead, couldn't remember his father at all. People said his plane was shot down in the war, but that was so long ago, he seemed like anyone else. We didn't care about calendar years, just birthdays. We were all 8 or 9, but Jack, who always had trouble at school, Jack was 11. These were the lineaments of what may or may not have been in Eden. Memory edits a life. We used the shed's oily work punch to fashion our principal pride and joy, parachutes for our little play soldiers. We made them out of handkerchiefs, string attached to all 4 corners, and a rubber band to fix them around the necks of the metal figures. We'd seen the matinee films. We all had practiced appropriate noises. We'd fold our parachutes, throw them skyward, imitate an explosion, and watch our paratroopers descend through the bland, soft summer air. Or we dropped them from hayloft ladders. None of us could have asked for better. Hamburgers, hot dogs, Kool-Aid, companions always on hand for fun. Vacations that stretched on and on and on. No one knew who'd tacked up that banner on one of the walls, block lettered. Army Air Force, keep them flying. This is a bit of a grim poem, but you ask Roger, he'll assure you that in real life I'm lots of fun. It's called My Mother's Bed Jacket. Its color soothed me. It might have been called, if not quite rightly, rosy. Nothing has matched it since I was small. The fabric must have been something like velvet. It felt more than merely soft. Since those days, in fact, I've touched nothing like it. The pillow she used in unsettling darkness as she lay by my gentle father shared the smell of that supple garment. Was its fragrance artificial, or rather the scent of a lovely young woman before years and liquor conspired to take her? It seems I still ache for that old aroma. It hasn't been replicated. Will never be. How did I climb over the 4 posters' rails? Or did she lift me? I hope she lifted me. I've resolved the sorrowful rage that eddied between us too soon for too long a time. I forgive her, yes. After all, I had a part in every storm. With a coarsened will for decades, well after that father died and left me broken, I fought to turn my mother back to what she could be no more. I cursed her stomach churning breath as I hauled her up from the floor, as I tried to scream away her roughness, to shout her red face back to pink, all futile, given her whiskey deafness. But still this longing, no matter how faint, to climb and lay me down near that odd old hue and odor and sense. I should have said, this is a little section of a new book I'm working on, which may be a collected. I think it's by the time my next book comes out, I'm told by my publisher, maybe 2023, and I'll be 81. So it may have to be a collected. I've resisted that for some time. She's asked me to do one before, and I thought, well, that's a little obituary. It's like writing your own tombstone, but the time is coming. And this section has to do with my younger life. This poem is called Grant Took Richmond, and it's dated Juneteenth, 2020. Texan holiday, which has come to national prominence thanks to the inanity and insanity of a certain person whose name shall not be spoken. Grant took Richmond. My mother's family, Pennsylvania Dutch, moved from the country closer to town in her parents' time. So their idiom faded or was quashed to accommodate a suburb. More genteel sayings replaced the Germanic. Great Caesar's goats, say, replaced Verstrecke for something amazing, a cloud of the shape of Billy Penn's hat or a highway collision. We lived together in the rambling house where she'd been born, as had my mother. Beside them, we were one patient father, two brothers, two sisters, and I, the eldest child. Though it didn't impress me much as a boy, in retrospect, what in tarnation? My grandmother's birth came 13 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, along with a fairly recent surrender of the rebel South to the Union Army, April 3rd, 1865. She also watched humans walk on the moon. A generation always believed that it's the one to have seen revolution. Though she barely missed the days of computers, she kept on fetching up old-time expressions. I'm not sure just why those old sayings return as across the country black anger mounts. My father commanded a company of colored soldiers in World War II. I remember one obscene report. Nazi prisoners sitting in front to hear lean a horn, for pity's sake, while black infantry stood at the back of the hall. No GI Bill for those troops later on, no subsidies for black-owned farms. It's high time now for remedy. I'm not sure what kind, I'm no great thinker. How trivial it seems how we brothers would battle, even occasionally raising closed fists. You're a caution to snakes, grandmother might shout, or you've run through the house like Grant took Richmond. But no one really got hurt. We're kids. Nowadays, we bond by unseen electrons. How quickly things change, as they always did. And so much didn't. So much didn't. Well, it's getting on there. Maybe I'll read two more poems and then call it an evening, although I'm happy to talk with people. This one is called Solace Stone, dated 1981. I had lately known a real grief. My younger brother, gone. So I set out alone, deep in Bro's gore where I'd never been until that morning a headstone leaned. It was quiet. There was never such quiet. Who can recall that marker but me? Who is there even to know about it? Doubtless someone. Hunters must see the canted slab now and then, there since 1841. It only bore one name, John Goodridge, maybe wife and childless. Water and sun had worn its shoulders smooth. Home late afternoon, near evening, I moved from woodpile to shed and back, less as if I were working than dreaming. Scents rose in that autumn dusk, then settled, odors of wood and green. I settled too in the wheelbarrow's bed, like a shard of log or some mud or a stone that might passively ride along. 40 years gone by since I bore witness to that marker. The world around me turned mute. I'd never known so entire silence. I wouldn't forget it, not ever. I would never not hear that stillness again. Our little family was set for winter. We'd soon be soothed by the iron stove's hum. I turned from our surfeit of firewood and felt at once that a gentle something from above the trees that looms by the woodshed and down through leaf and needle was falling into my bone, my flesh. I thought back on that morning, laden with silence, as if I could move beyond joy or sadness, stone quiet myself, and this could mean solace. Finally, another kind of paddling poem. This is an open canoe, though, with my wife in the bow, called My Wife's Back. All naked but for a strap, it traps my gaze. As we paddle, the dear familiar nubs of spine bone punctuating that sun-warmed swath. The slender muscles that trouble the same sweet surface. We've watched and smiled as green herons flushed and hopped ahead at every bend, and we've looked up at a red tail tracing open script on the sky, so clear and deep we might believe it's autumn, no matter it's August still. Another fall will be on us before we know it. Of course we adore that commotion of color, but it seems to come again as soon as it's gone away. They all do now. We're neither young anymore, to put matters plainly. My love for you over 40 years extends in all directions. Just now to your back as we drift and paddle down the tranquil Connecticut River. We've seen a mink scratch fleas out on a mud flat. We've seen an osprey start to dive, but seeing us, thought better of it. 2 phoebes wagged on an ash limb. Your torso is long. I can't see your legs, but they're longer, I know. Phoebe, osprey, heron, hawk. Marvels under Black Mountain. But I'm fixed on your back, indifferent to other wonders. Bright minnows that flared in the shallows. The gleam off that poor mink's coat. Even the fleas in its fur. The various birds, the lust of creatures just to survive. But I watch your back. Never have I wanted less to die. So that's that. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Oh, thank you, Sid. That was wonderful, wonderful. I love those new poems.
Thank you.
If someone has questions.